All right, here we are. Good morning, everybody. Hey, we got some attendees coming in the room. I see some familiar names. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're talking about digital support for folks with disabilities. And it is a topic that is not often presented on. And guess what? In this weird, crazy COVID environment that we have going on, a lot of folks are only getting access to education through digital means. And we have to do our best to make sure those learning environments are as inclusive as possible, and that all of our learning materials and our marketing materials and our websites are as inclusive as possible as well. I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time to get in the room. We're not going to get started right at 11. Obviously, it's 11:01 right now, but usually we start a couple minutes in and we make sure that everyone has time to get in the room, get settled, get that last cup of coffee, get that second pot of coffee going on, if you know what I mean. I'm going to be joined today with two other esteemed panelists, I will say. One is my colleague from Trellis Company, Heather Vaughn, and my other co-presenter is Dr. Chelsea Charan, who is a special education consultant, and also this topic is near and dear to their hearts. So I'm really glad that I'm beating the drum of accessibility for folks with disabilities with a couple of other colleagues who kind of feel the same. So we'll get started in just a second. We do have the subtitles turned on for PowerPoint this morning. We're not using the Zoom captioning. I found that the PowerPoint subtitles are a little bit more accurate. And if you want to know how to enable those, if you have PowerPoint, I want to say 2015 or newer, it's a free feature under PowerPoint. You can actually turn subtitles on, and you can kind of do your own closed captioning. Zoom also just integrated an auto transcription service, which is a great technological leap for Zoom. So one thing I want to just educate everyone on briefly is you do not have to pay to enable that auto transcription service in Zoom. It's actually a feature you have to turn on in your Zoom account. So everyone, if you're wondering where that feature is, log into your zoom.us account, go into your settings and enable auto transcription. And then on the little Zoom toolbar, when you open up a Zoom room, in those three dots underneath more, you can click on live transcript, and it'll transcribe every single thing you say and every single thing all of your other panelists say, which is a really, really cool feature. So I wanted to make everyone aware of that. Again, brand spanking new. It used to be a paid feature last year, but Zoom is rolling in the dough now, and they are able to turn on a few cool features for free. And one of those is the live transcription. If you have any questions today, please use the Q&A feature, just so Chelsea, Heather, and I can kind of keep those questions organized. You can also say hi in the chat, say hello, tell us where you're from if you'd like to. We'd love to see some schools up there and some hellos this morning. It's kind of a gloomy day in Central Texas, so if it's nice weather by you, let us know. And then any questions can go in the Q&A. Chelsea and Heather and I will kind of monitor the Q&A as we go, and we'll make sure that we keep everything very well organized. Finally, this is being recorded. I will send out the recording. We will be sharing all of the resources. There are clickable links in the PowerPoint presentation today that folks can click on. It leads, everything is hyperlinked out. All the hyperlinks are built ADA compliant. You would like to know they're all written as informative titles. So we're kind of trying to practice what we preach the best we can today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to some introductions here. Again, we're going to start going today. We see some people in the chat. Thank you for saying hi. So today we're talking about digital support for people with disabilities and actionable steps. This is not pie in the sky type stuff. It's actual software that you can actually use free or low cost to make sure that your learning environments and your learning materials, marketing materials are as close to compliant as possible. Full compliance is ridiculously difficult in some cases, but we're going to take you a long ways of the way there using software that's either free or software that is very, very low cost, or that is a software that your university or college may already have access to. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. So first, I will introduce myself. My name is Zach. I'm an institutional support consultant with Trellis Company. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat. So thank you if you're coming from one of my schools and patronizing the great content. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you. Hopefully you'll learn a lot. I'm going to kick it over to Chelsea. Chelsea, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Chelsea, and I am a special education consultant here. And I am happy to be here and happy to talk about such an important topic, especially in this time.
Awesome. And Heather, can you introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Heather Vaughn. I'm the creative program lead here at Trellis. I have the pleasure of working with Zach, and I'm happy to share all the cool resources and tools that are available online to help you get your documents ADA compliant.
Fantastic. And before we begin, if y'all were following the subtitles on the screen, notice that if you use the subtitle feature in PowerPoint, it won't pick up what Chelsea said and it won't pick up what Heather said. So I'm going to show you, just this is kind of like a very meta moment in the webinar. I'm going to close out the PowerPoint. I'm going to show you where that feature is. We're going to turn that feature off. Then we're going to turn on the live transcript service through Zoom, which will pick up everyone's voices. I just wanted y'all to see how cool this was. So I'm going to quickly exit out of my PowerPoint and I'm going to show you my screen right now. You'll see our PowerPoint slides. Underneath the slideshow tab, if you click on always use subtitles, that is where the subtitle feature is. And there are a couple of different options. You can lay them below the slide, above the slide, and you can program them to pick up different languages, which is really, really cool. Microsoft has a really great natural language processing software that they use. So it picks up many, many different languages. It's very, very accurate. But we're going to turn off those subtitles. So we're not going to use those today. Instead, I'm going to use the live transcript feature on Zoom. So what I'm doing now is going into my Zoom meeting. I'm going into the three dots that says more on the very bottom Zoom toolbar where it says mute, stop video participants. Click on those three dots and then click on live transcript and enable auto transcription. So now you should see down below, there's an automated transcription that's appearing on the screen that's going to pick up my voice. And now I'm going to mute myself. Chelsea, do you want to introduce yourself one more time?
Absolutely. Does it work? I don't see. Okay, perfect. So hi, I'm Chelsea, and I am happy to be here today. And I'm excited to talk about such an important topic that's very current and important.
Awesome. And Heather, one more time with you with the intro.
Hey there, I'm Heather Vaughn. I'm the creative program lead here at Trellis Company, and I'm excited to show you all the cool free resources and tools available.
Awesome. So those of you who are following on the Zoom feed here, you should see that live transcription below the screen. Notice the PowerPoint subtitles didn't pick up all of our voices, but the new accessibility feature in Zoom does pick up all our voices, and it's 100% free. So get into your zoom.us account, enable this feature. I would highly recommend you turn this on for every single meeting. And then when you log into Zoom, it'll actually give you a live transcript of the entire meeting. So you can follow up with your meetings with a text document that's going to be accessible for all people on that staff. So it's a fantastic feature. We really highly recommend you use it. We're going to get to the good stuff. We have C's and Z's and H's. We got all of our content broken down for you. We know exactly what we're going to say and when we're going to say it. So we're going to start off. Chelsea is going to give us a little bit of perspective on how COVID-19 has really impacted students with disabilities. We're going to use the SWD and PWD acronyms today. So students with disabilities, people with disabilities, using people first language. They're not disabled people, it's people with disabilities. Talking a little bit then about college students' rights, how recent research has actually engaged with practitioners to understand what have been the student hurdles to transitioning from an on-campus environment to a remote environment. And if we're going to go back on campus in the fall, what does that transition possibly look like? I'll talk about some of the tech stuff, the WCAG standards, W3C. It's acronym city, but we'll break it all down for you in a little bit. And then Heather is going to talk about some of those free and low-cost software programs that you can use to actually do what we call as ADA remediation, essentially making files as ADA compliant as possible so the widest range of folks can access all of the content. That is the goal. And then we'll leave it with some questions and then all of the good free resources that y'all can use. Let me tell you, there are so many free resources, full-length courses, training modules, so much information, and that information is constantly changing. As technology changes, folks keep up with it, and we're going to give you kind of the latest and greatest. So, Chelsea, do you want to kick it off? I mean, ripped from the headlines, what are people talking about regarding this topic?
Absolutely. So you can see here just the numerous headlines that just standing out to you that's talking about the disadvantage that persons with disabilities are facing because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this COVID-19 pandemic is specifically having a disproportionate impact on learners with disabilities. And these learners are already experiencing social and educational disadvantages. So from the onset, this global pandemic, it further emphasizes these pre-existing inequalities. The degree of exclusion that exists for persons with disabilities, it's rampant. The United Nations has deemed this population of disabilities and persons with disabilities to be the most excluded. And this is no different in the educational sector around the world. And this global pandemic, you can see even more so over the past year when we consider the challenges for students with disabilities. They're faced with these difficulties, especially with the transition from in-person learning to distance learning. Next slide. So there has been, in March 21st, 2020, there was a document that was published basically talking about the importance of ensuring free and appropriate education for all students with disabilities, all students from kindergarten through grade 12. But what was really important and kind of scary to note that there was no mention of higher education. Now, it's really great that they were talking about ensuring compliance with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, so IDEA, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and as well as Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, they're saying that these acts should not prevent any school from offering educational programs through distance instruction and education. However, the difficulty that college students with disabilities are facing is that where are they? Where are they mentioned? So this is why we're here. We want to know, how can we help students with disabilities, specifically in higher education, access everything online and through distance education? Next slide. What's important to note, so this is an interesting article that was recently published that talked about the educational rights of college students with disabilities. Now, through K through 12, students with disabilities are they're covered under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Now, this does not specifically apply to higher education. They are specifically focused on Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And what's interesting is that the disability categories are drastically different. So when you think about K through 12, you think about the 13 disability categories that are under IDEA. But what you don't get in college and higher education, there's an even larger spectrum of disabilities. So this includes like more psychiatric conditions, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, there's mental health disorders, different impairments and different health impairments. So it's important to note that in college, there's just a larger number of disability categories that need to be accommodated for. Now, this article specifically mentioned that in higher education, that there's difficulty with the provision of wheelchairs, modified physical learning environments, hearing aids, different learning tools. So the onus is on the university campuses to provide these infrastructure to accommodate and facilitate students with disabilities, especially if they have these needs. Now, through in K through 12, you have the individualized education plan where you have specialized programs and a plan and everything set out for students with disabilities. However, that's not the case in college. They cannot modify any academic courses to fit the person's disabilities. Now, yes, that is not technically universal design for learning, but there are ways to make that possible. And as faculty, you can provide accommodations based on the support you get from student support services. And another thing that's really important that this article touched on is the disclosure of the disability. So students have the option of disclosing whether or not they have a disability. And this can vary from course by course, or they can go throughout the entire university degree program and not disclose their disability. It's totally up to them. But that can also pose difficulties for students if they're not encouraged to be an advocate for themselves and understand that there's nothing wrong with them, that it's not a problem or it's not a bad thing to have a disability, and encourage them to disclose this disability, then they're able to get these accommodations that can be helpful for them. However, it's interesting to think about what's happening now when you think about these accommodations and how is it going to be provided, especially if these students are learning online. So that's why I guess you're here today, to figure out how you're going to do that. So next slide. I wanted to mention, before I talk about this report, that in 2013, the statistic of 11% of the population in higher education institutions have a disability. So that's a lot of people. And I mean, I'm sure it has increased from 2013 to now. So how are we accounting for these people? How are we helping them? How are we supporting them? And this report is very important because it notes the professionals' perspectives on access and barriers and what students with disabilities face as they're transitioning into these distance education learning. So it was interesting that we found that students with difficulties, they face difficulty transitioning. Of course, that we can tell, that's easy to assume, but this is re-emphasized. One of the greatest things that they faced difficulty with was access to internet and course materials, examinations, and being able to have frequent communication with faculty, and being able to provide their documentation for disability and actually getting access to these accommodations was more difficult. And, it's interesting to think about why this is the case. And a lot of it sums down to accessibility. What is this lack of accessibility that they're experiencing? So one of the other findings that was interesting was the community college students and with disabilities. They experience more difficulty than those who are in four-year colleges. And I want to point out just a couple of the percentages of that and the drastic transition between those without disabilities and those with disabilities. So students who couldn't access technology, the access for technology. So students with disabilities, 85% of students had difficulty accessing that technology, whereas 61% of students without disabilities had difficulty. So it's a pretty huge gap. Accessing course examinations, there's 60% of students with disabilities versus 46% of students without disabilities. And another major one that I mentioned was the communication with instructors. So 74% students with disabilities and 63% of students without disabilities. But it's important to note that the greatest reported difficulty, as I mentioned in percentage wise, was receiving technology support and communicating with faculty about inclusive course design. So now we'll move straight into Zach's part where he talks about web accessibility.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chelsea. And what's so interesting about the transition between K-12 and higher ed, having been a former K-12 special ed teacher, is students had IEPs, family members or support network members were involved in that process. There were case managers, there were school psychologists. All of that almost uniformly disappears at higher education. And the only thing that colleges have to do by law is follow some of the guidelines that we'll talk about in terms of digital accessibility, and then provide what are called reasonable accommodations for taking tests, for accessing course material. That comes down to the willingness of the faculty member to provide those reasonable accommodations. Think back to how many courses that you've taken in your college career, how many different faculty members you had. You would have had to go to every single faculty member and request reasonable accommodations every single time you needed them. That exhausts kids, and that's not best practices, but that's letter of the law, what colleges and universities, bare minimum, are required to do. The much larger lift, as Chelsea was talking about, is this technology support. We know it's problematic in a COVID-19 environment when everything is virtual and where everything's remote. Here's what we're talking about when we talk about web accessibility. Web accessibility is when websites and web tools are properly coded and built to be used by people with disabilities using an assistive technology. A lot of folks may have heard of a screen reader technology. That's an assistive technology. It reads every single piece of metadata in a website, in a PDF file, in a Word doc, in a PowerPoint file, and it reads that content back to a student. Sometimes a screen reader can be controlled with only a keyboard, only a mouse. It can track eye movement, and students can actually scroll down pages using blinks for mouse clicks if they have limited mobility. Websites and learning materials, course design needs to be written in a way that's robust enough. Any person with any disability using any assistive technology can access the same content. Chelsea was talking about earlier, students arrive on campus with a wide spectrum, a crazy wide spectrum of disabilities, and every student might use a different assistive technology. There are certain standards you can follow when you're building websites, building course content, marketing materials. Let's say you want to send a flyer to your students, encouraging them to complete the FAFSA or join you on some sort of virtual event or an on-campus event. All of that information can be built in a way that no matter the disability, no matter the assistive technology, everyone has access to the same. There was the W3C web. I'm sorry, did I freeze a little bit?
Yeah.
Freeze. If you could, panelists, I'm going to have you mute both of your videos just to cut down on some of the lag. Thank you both. And I'll cue you, Heather, to unmute your video in a second here when I transition. Sorry about that, everyone. Technology issues, right? We're living in this environment. We'll make it through together. The W3C is the Web Accessibility Initiative way back in the early 1990s when the web was really being developed and scaled for widespread use worldwide. And there are a list of standards associated with that Web Accessibility Initiative. They are called WCAG standards, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We have linked that source here in the PowerPoint deck, which we will share with everyone after the presentation today. It is an exhaustive list of so many guidelines that y'all need to follow to make sure you're maintaining a certain level of compliance in Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It's a wide range of accommodations and recommendations. And it's so robust that in 1998, US Congress actually implemented the standards as the official threshold of compliance that institutions of higher education must reach. So those web content guidelines, they were created by a non-governmental third party. The government thought so highly of them that they are written into law today in ADA. And all Title IV institutions are held to WCAG 2.0 standards per the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Here's a quick screenshot. Again, this is just a small snippet, a small overview of some of the standards. It has to do with font size, color contrast, how you build menus and drop-down lists, how you use hyperlinks, how you embed pictures and video, multimedia content into websites, PDFs, PowerPoints. It's a really robust set of web standards. And there are entire organizations dedicated to solely web compliance and accessibility compliance using WCAG 2.0 as the official level of compliance that Title IV institutions need to abide by. Why is there a renewed emphasis on ADA? Well, way back in 1973, and then it's been adopted and amended in many times since, it prohibits educational discrimination against that PWD population. Section 508 was added as technology started advancing. They knew that it wasn't just educational discrimination in a classroom setting. The classroom setting could be digital, and we need to look toward digital sources. So Section 508 was written, it was amended in 2018, and now all Title IV institutions are held to a level AA threshold of compliance. And there is a source for that, again, written into law, that websites and digital communication must be web accessible for people with disabilities. Why is this happening recently, though? Why the renewed emphasis? Because everyone was being sued. So colleges were publishing applications, publishing websites, other kinds of collateral, and none of it was ADA compliant. So some students were having a really hard time simply applying to a school. There was one instance where a man in New York City tried applying to 50 different colleges, and none of the applications were web accessible for people with disabilities. He filed a bunch of lawsuits, and people have won those lawsuits because institutions of higher education are not meeting that level of that allows all people to have access to the same information. So here are, it's a brief checklist of some things that you can think about. If this is a totally new topic to you, think to yourself about this checklist. Here are the big issues. Does your institutional web developer know what web accessibility is? Are they aware? For instance, I was working with one university whose official color scheme was a dark navy and a dark orange. Those colors are not contrastive enough, so their entire color palette was not ADA compliant. They needed to go to their web developer at the highest level and say, we need to get with marketing. We need to change the official Pantones and hex colors of our entire institution. That is a very high level discussion, has many stakeholders involved, but those are the kind of discussions that need to be had to make sure that from the top down, everyone's at least aware of the issue. Second, kind of how many chefs are in the kitchen analogy, right? How many people can actually edit your website? One institution I worked with had over 1,000 accounts that could edit the landing page. How terrifying is that, right? Imagine a faculty staff member being able to log in and edit anything on the landing page, the very first .edu that a student sees when they click on that hyperlink. How many chefs are in the kitchen, and how many people know how to build inclusive content who should have edit access to that landing page and to all of the other web pages on your website? Finally, trimming the fat. Google yourself and try to find old documents from 2015, 2016. Now, if they're institutional SAP policies or student conduct policies that were adopted in a certain year and are still good today, that content is fine. You got to keep that. But FAFSA instructions for 2013 doesn't seem to be relevant now, and that may live on a website that a student can still access. So go back in time and see how many old web pages are students just not visiting, faculty, staff, or not using, and delete them. The fewer web pages you have live, the fewer bits of content that you have to make ADA compliant for those students and those external stakeholders. And then here are some, before you click publish or send, guidelines as well. So for every kind of day-to-day content creators, those of you out there who are making any kind of content for an educational purpose, either for a student, faculty, or staff member, defining the website's language. If you don't know what this is, hold tight. We have a resource to share with you at the very end of the PowerPoint. It's as simple as sharing a link with your web developer to alert them of this problem. A lot of websites don't tell students, for instance, who are blind, that the website is written in English. Or for our Spanish-speaking community members out there, alerting a Spanish speaker who has a disability that there is Spanish language content on that page. Without defining the website's language, a student will never know if there's translated content on a website. Using a simple readable font, today we are using Cambria. Cambria is a very accessible font, and we'll talk a little bit more about font in a second. Strong color contrast, again, we're trying to practice what we preach today. Dark font on a light background. All of y'all should, really have very little issue with reading the font in these PowerPoint slides. It's very contrastive. Adding text to pictures. The picture is an educational purpose. If you're trying to explain something to a student, if you're creating an infographic, you have to have accompanying text that describes that picture. Same thing with closed captioning and video. And today we have the auto transcription going on the Zoom call. Giving hyperlinks and informative titles. You should never, in a student-focused content, list the website www.blah.edu/. It should always be embedded in words that describe where the website goes. So don't use FAFSA.gov. Use click here to fill out the FAFSA and embed that hyperlink in what's called that informative title. That is an ADA compliant hyperlink that tells a student where the link goes, not what the link's address is, not what the URL is. Understanding heading sizes, this is especially important to give students an idea of how to read the content and in what order. This may be over a few folks' heads, but this is more content for web developers to help understand how to build content in certain headings so students know to read heading 1 before 2, before 3, and how the page is built so they can navigate it easily. Here are a few examples of accessible fonts. Again, use Cambria in this presentation. Verdana is also highly accessible. Those of y'all who get emails from me, my signature is in Verdana. It's very web accessible for a few reasons. It has feet that make letters stick out from caps to lowercase to uppercase, and we'll show you a few examples here. So in size 28 font across the board, illegal activity is frowned upon. Notice how you can very clearly tell the difference between a capital I and a lowercase l. Here's where the font becomes less readable. So Cambria, notice the feet aren't quite as prominent, so telling the difference between a capital I and a lowercase l a little more difficult. It gets more difficult with Arial. It gets more difficult with Hattenschweiler. Hattenschweiler is a terrible font. Please don't use it. That's my PSA. And as a font nerd, I can pretty clearly say that Verdana is a much more web accessible font. Here's just one example of how you can make sure your communication is readable by all people. Here's an example of font size and color contrast. I challenge you to read the content in the footer of that screenshot. A light green font on a dark green background, and the font size might be size 10 or smaller. So not only is the font not contrastive enough, it's also not big enough to read. So that's one example of how this website and this footer is not compliant with standards. It definitely should be more contrastive and should be larger. Another thing you need to do is make sure you're building fillable forms in a way that students know if there's going to be a pop-up menu. So in this website, in the background, I clicked on Apply Online, and it didn't tell me that there was a pop-up menu. Now, if you don't tell a student who's using an assistive technology that there's a pop-up menu, they may click Apply Online, but then what do? Are they a freshman? Are they a transfer, graduate student? None of those menu items were built in a way that told the student, hey, listen, if you click on apply online, you're going to be asked for your choice of application. That was totally missing. You need to make sure that you build hyperlinks in a way where students know where they're going before they click on them. Writing ADA compliant emails, here's a really quick summary. When writing emails, make sure that you begin in Word and then make sure you copy and paste in the email field. That will make sure you're using all of the Word accessibility guidelines, and we'll show you some examples and some resources in a bit how to use Word to make your content more ADA accessible. Secondly, prioritizing text and then using that simple readable font, right? Text is almost universally readable. Pictures and videos, it gets a lot more complicated the more multimedia you use in your communication. So prioritizing text, using a strong color contrast. And also if you're using night mode on your phone, make sure the contrast is strong enough if they're using night mode or day mode, depending on what color the font is and how dark the background is. Adding alt text to pictures. Y'all will get this PowerPoint, and I built alt text in this picture to describe this image, a picture of two college students walking on campus. They're wearing backpacks and talking to each other. You have to have alt text to describe the images in your documentation. And then using informative alt text, using informative titles. Notice that the www.trelliscompany.org, a screen reader would actually read that letter by letter. Instead, embed the hyperlink in the words Trellis Company Research website. So if a student hovers over that, it'll read link Trellis Company Research website. It won't read https://. That's not an informative title for the hyperlink. The title tells the user what the link is. A lot of the same stuff for compliant PowerPoints and Word documents when creating files. Use the accessibility features built in. We have links to all of those, and all those accessibility features are free in most versions. Adobe Pro has the accessibility features built in. Adobe Reader does not, so that's one limitation. Pack 3 is also a free software to audit PDFs. A lot of times, if you make a Word document ADA compliant and export to PDF, you're missing a lot of information. Pack 3 will help you go back through and audit your communication. Again, a lot of the same standards. Use a simple readable font, color contrast, add alt text to pictures. And then also making this metaphor, you don't know where the PDF has been if you haven't created it. So be hesitant to share a PDF that may have come from a different source. Run it through Pack 3, see if it's ADA compliant. If it's not, you may have to do some remediation on your own because you can't trust that the person who made that PDF made it in an ADA compliant fashion. A lot of resources are also linked. Are those websites accessible? A lot of faculty members might link out to different courses, different resources. If those educational materials are not ADA compliant, the institution is on the hook because the faculty member linked to learning materials that weren't compliant. Harvard University got dinged because they were not using accompanying audio files with some of their digital textbooks. Had nothing to do with the university, but it was the faculty member choosing content that was not ADA compliant. I'm going to kick it over to Heather. Heather is the guru of software, and she's going to talk a little bit more about how you can actually leverage this software to improve your communication at a very low cost or no cost. So,
all right, I'm unmuted. Okay, so Adobe Acrobat Pro DC will offer you accessibility tools for remediating your documents. The two tools within Acrobat Pro are Accessibility and Optimize. I'd just like to make a few notes about remediation. Depending on the length and or complexity of your document, the remediation process can take 5 to 10 minutes or 1 to 2 hours or more. The way you set up your source document in Word or PowerPoint or InDesign can make all the difference in your remediation time. As the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. But even if you have your file set up properly, there are some things like tables that will take a lot of time because you have to manually identify column headers and row headers. So if your PDF has a lot of issues, I highly recommend you go back to the source file and clean things up there. This is going to save you a lot of time and frustration. And remediation can't be an afterthought. When you're starting your document, think it all the way through and think about how you want the document to flow and how it would appear on a screen reader. And remediating documents is not necessarily something you can implement overnight. It's going to take you time to gain the necessary remediation skills and to develop the new habits for creating documents using the software features as intended. Try not to get too frustrated or overwhelmed with the process at first. Okay, so now let's look at the accessibility tool. Next. Okay, so within Adobe Acrobat Pro, you have the accessibility tool, and this will allow you to run what's called the accessibility check. Next slide. So in your accessibility checker, as you can see on the first screenshot, it will identify any issues that you have in your document. Now, some of the items, if you right click on them, you have a fix option, which is great because it automatically will fix it for you. But others, as you'll see in the next screenshot, it requires a manual check. And then these can be a little bit more time consuming. Next slide. So one of the things that you'll need to do a manual check on is the logical reading order. And the way you check this is in your tags panel. And the tags panel is going to identify the order in which the items on the page will be read by a screen reader. So you can kind of think of the tags panel like a table of contents. It's going to tell you what's coming up next. And here in the tags panel, this is where you can also make any corrections to improperly tagged items, which does happen. Next. Okay, so color contrast is a big thing, as Zach mentioned. There is a great free resource called on the WebAIM website, which will allow you to check your color contrast, which is something you have to do manually when remediating. The great thing about this site is you don't have to know your hex codes or the RGB numbers for your colors. In the foreground color and background colors areas, there is a box, and if you click on that, it will open up a window that has an eyedropper tool. And then you simply drag that eyedropper tool around in your PDF document and click on foreground color and background color. And what it will do is it will show you here normal text, large text, and then graphical objects, whether it passes or fails. And so you just simply select your colors and check this out, and it'll identify if it passes or fails. I use this probably every day. I absolutely love this resource. Okay, next. So then going back into Acrobat, another feature you have in the accessibility tool is what's called the reading order panel. And this is going to allow you, sometimes things won't get tagged or they'll get tagged inappropriately. And so this will allow you to select those items and then correctly identify it, whether it's text or a heading or a table. And this you will also use for tables, because as I mentioned before, you have to go in and identify if it's a column header or a row header. And so you can use the table editor here in the reading order panel. Now, I would like to point out, if there are elements on your page that are just decorative, that you don't want a screen reader to read, you would mark those as background or artifact. And I just want to note that when you're making that indication in Word, Word calls them decorative. So artifact or decorative, it's the same thing, just different programs will use different terminology. Okay, next. So as you can see on the left part of the screen, that in the accessibility checker panel, whereas before there were lots of issues, once you work through everything, you shouldn't see anything bolded, it shouldn't have any issues identified, and then you will know, okay, your remediation is complete for now. So then we'll go on to the Optimize tool. Okay, so within the Optimize tool, there is a feature called Preflight. And what you'll want to do, once you've made all your corrections and your PDF's good to go, you'll want to run some Preflight options before finalizing your document. Next. Okay, so these are 4 different panels showing the 4 different Preflight options we use on our documents. The first one is embed fonts. You'll want to click this to embed your fonts. And the great thing about all of these is you click it, you click the fix button, and it magically fixes it. So the first one is embed fonts. The next one is you want to mark your artifacts. The third one, create content link. You'll want to use that if you have any links in your document, you'll want to run this, and then that will properly tag them and you won't have any issues. And the last one is set PDF UA. And again, select it, click the fix button, and it will magically fix it. Okay, next. Okay, Pack 3, as Zach mentioned before, I absolutely love this tool and it's free, which makes it even better. This has been a total game changer for us with our documents. Whereas before I felt like, okay, I feel pretty good about my PDF being accessible. With Pack 3, it's just given me so much more confidence to know that, yes, this is the best that I can do here. You'll see the first screenshot when you open the program, this is what you'll see, and you just simply drag your PDF file onto the highlighted area, and it'll run a report. It goes pretty quick depending on the length of your document. And as you can see, some things have green check marks and some have red X's, and that is letting you know where your issues are. Next slide. So what I love, two features I love. The first one is the results in detail. When you click on the results in detail button, it's going to list out all of the issues that it has identified. And the best part is you get a little screenshot of your actual document and it identifies specifically where on that document the issue is. Whereas before, sometimes in Acrobat, it's like finding a needle in a haystack and you just spend so much time. And in here, it's so great because I can actually see exactly where the problem is and then go back to Acrobat and fix it in there. Next slide. And the other feature I absolutely love is the screen reader preview. What this does is it gives you a view of how your document would look on a screen reader. And as you can see here in the screenshot, it identifies, what is identified as a heading, as a list, as a figure. And there's times that things look good and I've got green check marks, but I'll come in here and I'll think, oh, I'll see like maybe something's out of order, or I want to clean something up, or maybe something didn't quite get tagged properly. So I absolutely love being able to see the preview of the document here. Okay, next. So once you've gone back to Acrobat and fixed everything and you run your checker again, ideally the goal is to have this beautiful green check mark that says all of the requirements are fulfilled. But don't get defeated if you can't quite get here. Sometimes you'll get a yellow warning symbol, and what that is indicating that there could possibly be issues. So you're either going to get a green check mark, a yellow warning that there are possible issues, or a red X saying that it's not. I just feel like anything you can do to make your document more accessible is better than not doing anything at all. So if you get that yellow warning, try to make it green. If you can't quite get there, do the best you can. As you're learning, it does take time. And then, ultimately you'll get this wonderful green check mark. Okay, next. Okay, another free tool is there's a free plugin that is a plugin for Acrobat Pro called PDF Go HTML. And like the screen reader in Pack 3, this plugin allows you to preview the content in your document. So what PDF Go HTML does is it converts tagged PDF files into HTML supporting the ISO PDF UA standard for universally accessible PDF documents and forms. So one simple click on the plugin button converts the tagged PDF into HTML that is opened in your default browser. And this screenshot along the bottom shows all the different versions or ways that you can see your document, such as easy reader, inverted, low vision, and dyslexia. And this is a great way to see how your content will be viewed, and it's especially helpful when checking the tables in your document. Next. So there's a lot of articles, blogs, videos, you can go on YouTube that can offer help in how to fix issues. One of the resources I like and have been using is a website called Tagged PDF, and they have a list of common issues that you will run into in Pack 3, and then they explain how to fix those issues. Next. And what I really like about this site is they have a written explanation on how to fix issues, but they also have a video, and it's step by step. You actually see the person going through and doing all the steps to fix it. And if you're a visual learner like me, these videos are a lifesaver, because it really does help you get the help you needed and how to fix issues. Okay, next. And finally, LinkedIn Learning. They have a series of accessibility training courses. The courses are not free, and LinkedIn Learning does require a subscription. But if you can access them, I highly recommend them. I really like this instructor, Chad Chelius. I think he does a great job explaining how to fix things. And again, he has courses from beginner to advanced. And in the end, I just like to say, my advice to everyone out there is just to bring your documents up to a minimum accessibility first, and then build on that. Work on the big issues and don't focus too much on the details just yet. Allow yourself time to gain the skills necessary for remediation. And that's my portion of this, Zach.
Awesome, Heather. Thank you so much. We're going to give you a bunch of resources, and guess what? They're all using the informative titles. Look at that. So right now, if you're curious, if you're on a Mac computer, here's where we're going to get a little bit more meta. You can just minimize the Zoom window and hold Command F5. So hold Command, type F5 if you're on a Mac. That'll automatically launch a VoiceOver. It's a built-in assistive technology that's free on all Mac machines. And guess what? Windows has the same thing. Hold the Windows key, Control Enter. That'll launch Narrator. What I used to do when I was learning how to use assistive technologies and advocate for folks with disabilities is I actually started using some of these assistive technologies, and you experience the difficulty and the learning curve that students experience and people experience to access everyday content. I mean, we take vision for granted all day, every day. And having a screen reader and a little bit of experience in using one can be pretty eye-opening. And it's totally free. It's built into every Windows and Mac machine ever made. So Command F5 for Mac, and then Windows is Windows button, Control button, Enter button. There is a link to the Department of Ed guidance on 504 if you're curious about that, and the WCAG quick reference guide, so you can see what threshold of compliance that Title IV schools need to adhere to. There are all of the Microsoft Windows accessibility resources. Somebody asked in the chat, is there a certification that your website is compliant? And not really, but there are free ways to check the compliance. I use Tnon quite a bit, tnon.io, but you can also use A-Checker. It's a Canadian website, and the Canadians have built a crazy, robust website that checks ADA compliance of any hyperlink. It's plug and chug. You copy and paste the hyperlink. You can also copy and paste a PDF or upload a file, and it'll check it. It's a little bit less intuitive. It's a little bit more of a learning curve to understand the outputs, but it is free. A quick link on how to define your website's language. Again, that's just baseline compliance. You have to have that language tag in your HTML code on your website. That's how to do it. There are a couple of other training resources. Heather mentioned that Adobe has accessibility training web sources, and then edX just started a course. It's totally free, Introduction to Web Accessibility. The modules are awesome. The videos are awesome. It is a very slow, easygoing pace, because if you haven't picked up on Heather's content, there is a technical expertise and a technical skill involved with doing this work. It is not just believing in supporting people with disabilities. It's learning new software and learning new skills to actually support them in a day-to-day basis, creating accessible and inclusive content. There's a great website from WebAIM. Again, can't say enough good things about WebAIM. There's a font guide for accessibility. Again, a huge font nerd. Love that website. And then Penn State also has a great color contrast guide to let you know how you can tweak some of your colors to make sure you're a little more compliant kind of out of the box. So that is going to conclude the presentation. I'm going to go back for the web accessibility resources and keep those up on the screen. But right now, I'm just going to cue my other panelists today. First, I'll ask Chelsea Chelsea, do you have any kind of closing thoughts or final thoughts, any points you want to drill home before we're done today?
I just have a concluding thought. So, by creating and supporting an accessible learning environment, both in person and online, higher education institutions can significantly reduce the barriers and challenges students with disabilities face and provide them, most importantly, with equal opportunities to access all of the information available to them.
Awesome. And thank you, Chelsea. Heather, do you have any kind of final 2 cents you want to throw into this conversation?
Sure. I'll just throw out there, the remediation, all the stuff I went through it really quick, and I don't want to scare anyone off. It's, it's, you're definitely going to learn a new skill set. And like Zach said, there's a skill to it, and it's not always easy, and it can be super frustrating, but it's also very rewarding. And it's just, it makes you feel good knowing that your documents are accessible by everyone. And the reward is definitely worth the time and effort it takes to get you there. So try not to get too frustrated or overwhelmed at first, and just know that there is help out there. Certainly reach out if you have questions, because ideally we just want to make things as much as accessible as we can to as many people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both. And thank you both for joining me today too and taking an interest in this. It's awesome to have you both on the team accessibility. The final note that I'll make is that given the wealth of information today, it's very, very easy to say that you support people with disabilities. Who wouldn't say that, right? There is a level of work that you need to put into it to really kind of practice what people are preaching. And so we really tried today to make sure that our PowerPoint was accessible, that the Zoom room was accessible, that everyone had access to the same content. This is stuff that I've slowly picked up over literally 12 years of working in education, starting from working with kids with disabilities at the high school level and seeing them struggle through websites that weren't built for them and learning materials that weren't built for them. I was that teacher that was scanning pages out of literature anthologies, assuming that students could read them online, and I was wrong. I made so many mistakes. There is such a learning curve, but it is worth it that, the people in this room who've chosen to take an interest in this, again, it's not as many folks as other webinar topics because this topic is difficult. It takes a technical expertise and a patience to support people with disabilities. And finally, going back to the statistic that Chelsea shared, that 11% of higher ed students have a documented disability. That's only the folks who have documented their disability. There are lots of invisible ones walking around, or folks that don't have the support or feel too much shame in coming forward and documenting their disability and getting the help that they deserve. So it's a hugely underserved population in higher ed. Let me tell you, all of us in this room are one bad day away from having a life-threatening, life-limiting disability, and we need to be on board with folks who are struggling through that every single day. Not to put too much of a deficit frame on it, but it's very, very difficult to access a lot of college content on the website, on the email, in a PDF, in a Word document. We just want to ease that bar a little bit and try moving the needle in the right direction. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I have 2 questions in the Q&A that I can address quickly. Would y'all caution against having 2 versions of the same document? Yes. I would say have one accessible version of that document, because you don't know which version a person's going to access. And you want to kind of cover your bases and make sure that one document, and you don't have to duplicate your efforts then. And then David asks, is there a helpline that we can get through to make sure that you achieve WCAG? There is not a helpline. There are kind of third-party contractors that can help you. David, reach out to me. Let's connect offline, and I can help you find some free resources, and I can help you do a little bit of training with your staff to make sure that we can kind of cover some main points. But there are really not too many free resources that will actually help you one-on-one make sure you achieve WCAG compliance, because it takes a very high level of technical skill to do it, but there's some guidelines and there's some resources that I can help you access to make sure that your team can get as far down the road as you can. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. It is noon. It's time for lunch for me. I need a sandwich. Hopefully we're not cutting into too many people's lunch times either, but thank you so much for joining us. Everyone will get an email follow-up from me when the video is available. We'll send you the PowerPoint, and please reach out to me, email Chelsea, email Heather. We are here to help you through. You're not going to go through it alone. It's a steep learning curve, but we're going to try to help flatten that curve for you. You see that COVID pun that I put in there, flattening the curve? There we go. We're on topic. It's very topical today. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Chelsea and Heather, for being the road warriors with me today. I really appreciate both of you. And everyone, have a great day. Take care, and we'll be in touch soon. Have a great Wednesday and a great rest of the week. See you, everybody.